Welcome to this Getting Started with SharePoint Framework Extensions tutorial series, and in this tutorial we'll have a look on how to build your first field customizer extension. So we're going to create the extension, we're going to modify the extension slightly, and then we're going to host the extension or deploy the extension to be available within the SharePoint Online. And this is the general availability September 2017 edition. So let's jump right into it. So I'm going to move back on my console. In the console, let's actually create us a new folder where we can have this solution. So I'm going to call this MD field customizer. So we know that that's our field customizer, or field extension, which we are actually creating. Let me actually go to that folder as well. So in this folder, I'm going to execute yo Microsoft SharePoint. So we're going to start the scaffolding process to get our basic solution available. So let's start by accepting the default value, which is the folder name as well. The next question is around, are we building this solution for SharePoint Online or also for on-premises? And the SharePoint Framework Extensions are only available within the online for time being. So we're going to use the SharePoint Online only. And we're going to use the current folder in this case. And then there's a discussion around, do we want this solution to get deployed to all sites immediately without running any feature deployment? So because we are talking about extensions, the extension can be enabled to be available within a site immediately, but you need to still light up the extension in the site if you want to take advantage of this tenant scope deployment option. In our case, within this tutorial, we're going to create this solution based on an assumption that you want to install the solution explicitly to a site. So we're going to answer no. And we are building an extension, and we're building a field customizer extension. We're going to use the basic hello world as the extension, field customizer extension name, and we can use the basic description as well. And this one, and then we can choose whatever framework we want to use. So we're going to have a default structure for React or default structure for no JavaScript framework. You can absolutely use whatever JavaScript framework with SharePoint Framework. This is just what is the default templating, which will be available from Yeoman template by default. So you can enable, you can use Angular, you can use Knockout, you can use whatever with the field customizer as well. So do not get confused on that question. So we're going to use no JavaScript framework, and that starts the scaffolding process. So this one will take a while, so we're going to speed up a video until the scaffolding has been fully completed. And there we go. Now the extension as scaffolding has been completed, so we can open up our structure. So I'm going to do a code and opening up the solution. And here's my Visual Studio Code. You can use whatever editor you want. In these tutorials, we're using Visual Studio Code, which is no doubt an awesome editor for this kind of development. Now, as you can see, the basic structure is exactly the same as client-side web parts or whatever the other extension solutions, because the basic SharePoint Framework solution structure is exactly the same. The questions which were asked related on extensions or web part only impact on what are we by default getting scaffold as a source code. It doesn't change the basic structure of the solution at all. So you will have still the same package solution, same write manifest, and all of those things within here as well. So in this case, we created a field customizer, which is scaffolding the basic setup in here underneath the extensions. So if I open up the manifest, we can actually see that there's nothing that special. It's an extension and a field customizer. The one thing what we need from here, because we're talking about SharePoint Framework Extensions, we need this ID, the unique ID for debugging. We will be debugging this extension against a live site as we move along on the journey of making things happen. Now, the actual implementation of the field customizer is in here, and you can see that we have a base classes available from the Microsoft scope. And the actual basic default implementation is available here. This is quite simple, quite simplistic. We are locking something whenever the field is getting initialized on render cell, which is the one which is overriding the rendering of the cell. We take the sample text property and the field value, and we output that as the value of the field. So we'll take one of the properties provided as a property or the parameter for this field customizer, including that one in, and then the field value. So let's actually test this one first live, and then we start modifying this slightly, enhancing the behavior, and then we deploy that against SharePoint without the debugging strings or debugging query parameters. But before doing so, let's actually test that everything is working properly after the initial scaffolding, that we get the right debugging URLs and everything else working. So I'm going to move back on my console. In the console, I'm going to actually first execute gulp serve --no browser. And this is going to start the local node server and host this solution to my localhost 4321 port. So we can actually do some debugging against the live SharePoint site and making sure that everything is working properly. Let me move to a site. So I'm going to move to my tenant where we have been doing some testing previously as well. So let me go to site contents, because we want to actually create a new list for testing this particular extension. So let me go to new, and let's create a list. Let's call this list orders, and creating that list to the site. In the orders list, whenever the order list actually is getting created, there we go. Let's add a new field by clicking this plus button here, and we want to add a number field. We're going to call this %, because we're going to modify the behavior of this field as we move along. So % field, and clicking save. And now we can see that we have a list with a title field and a % field, and let's add a few items in this list so we can get some additional content available. So I'm adding an item A, and let's get an item A a value of 10, and adding another item here as well, item B. And let's get that one slightly different value so we can see the behavioral difference whenever our implementation is available. And then a final value, item C. Let's give that one a 90 as the % value. So now we want to debug our field customizer on top of this live SharePoint site. And that means that we need to take advantage of a field, the debugging query parameters. And in the written tutorial, you can actually get access on the debugging query parameters, and you can see the basic structure of that thing. So I'm going to start a notepad so we can actually see this one in practice. So this is the debugging query parameters. And basically what we're doing here, that we're saying, hey, SharePoint, we are a developer. We want you to actually load a debugging manifest file from this location, which is the one which is running right now in this computer. And this is a field customizer for % field, and the field customizer unique ID is that one, and we can bypass also properties in. So the one thing what we need to remember on updating on this query parameter is the ID. So this has to match with the manifest ID of the field customizer, which we're just right now building. So let me jump back on my implementation. Here we go, opening up my manifest file, and we want to debug this field customizer. So I'm going to copy that one, move back on the notepad, update that query parameter, so that GUID accordingly, so it's actually matching with that ID from my implementation. And then I'm going to copy this query parameter to my I will just copy that to the memory of the computer, so I can actually use that within the browser. So in the browser, probably the easiest way to actually use the query parameters is get rid of all of the additional things. So in this case, all additional query parameters which might be there already. There is a view ID defined and after the old items. We can easily get rid of that just to clean up the URL, and then we can just take the query parameter one more time, copy that, and paste that one in the address, clicking enter, and if everything goes well, we can actually see our field customizer starting to get to load. We'll first have the debugging scripts to make sure that we are actually fine for loading the debugging scripts from on-premises, And now we can actually see our initial basic field customizer getting rendered on the UI. And what actually happens here is that we are providing a query parameter called sample text property is called hello, and that was actually getting rendered together with the percentage field value in here. So you can see that hello is there, and the actual value of the field is listed on there. And because this is now a parameterized, I can do some modification, value being, and request that one more time. We can see that the properties are getting reflected on the UI, and we can change the behavior of the field by adding those things in the properties and query parameters when we're calling the page. Now, okay, it works. But now we know that it actually works. We can load the page and everything is fine. But let's modify this slightly so we actually get slightly more visual difference on the field customizer. So not a massive amount of differences, but still. So let's move back on the code and let's modify our existing code. So let's go to our style definition and modify this one to have slightly different styling. So I'm adding this full and a cell styles here. Let's then go to our field customizer, and in the field customizer slightly modify the on render cell. We're not interested actually on the properties sample text in this case. We want to rather render this value of the field using a graphical implementation and those styles which we just added. So here we go. We are adding a style called cell to that event DOM element and cell class list, which is essentially the field or the div where the value of the item is getting rendered. And then we're adding the inner HTML and rendering that one here as well. So we have the width being set as the field value for that particular div, and then we have the field value getting output here as well. Saving changes. There we go. We should see our console being reflected. So the updated implementation is getting loaded on the local host. And that means that if I now go back on my site and request the URL one more time, we can actually see the UI being reflected with those changes which we had here. So loading debugging scripts, and there we go. Now we have a new rendering logic of the field, which is showing the value of the field still, but it's also rendering this this graphical presentation of the percentage value for the field. All good. So everything works now. So the next steps is then to think about, okay, how do I get this one deployed to the SharePoint without the debugging query parameters? Because obviously in the production usage you wouldn't be doing that. So let's flip back on the code and let's have a look on how the default scaffolding actually is helping us on making this happen. So let me close this and let's actually go back on the solution structure. Let me extend the SharePoint folder. There is an asset folder and there's an elements XML inside of here. So this one is getting automatically generated for you as a reference when you get started and when you get when you scaffold the default field customizer. And again, there's multiple different options to modify and multiple different settings for the field. So you can modify using the feature framework definitions, the field settings. But basically what it means is that whenever the solution is getting installed to a site, this field is getting created to the site as well. And this field has a client-side component ID associated to it automatically. And this means that your client-side component, in this case, the field customizer, is automatically getting rendered whenever this field is getting used anywhere within the site. So SharePoint will know that, okay, there is a field customizer somewhere available installed in app catalog, or that has to be in the app catalog, and we'll load that based on the URL definitions of the SPPKG package whenever this field is being presented on the UI. If you need to modify, for example, the type and display name, you can absolutely do that. This is just a baseline structure for you to understand the basic setup what has to be there. As part of the basic structure, we also modified automatically the package JSON to introduce a feature for you, which is then referencing the element XML file. So the basic setup is kind of there, to test the percentage field automatically. And if you're looking into having alternative field types and everything else, you need to modify the XMLs based on the feature framework element XML or feature framework schema. So how do we actually get this one then deployed? How do we get this one deployed to the site in a way that it's always being rendered properly? Let's move into our console side. So I'm going to stop the rendering of or hosting my local host. Let's clear up the UI slightly, or the console. And then I'm going to do culp bundle. Now that everything is configured, we double check the XML is looking good. We double check that the solution manifest is looking good. We could do a culp bundle. And after that, we are doing culp. Let me actually clear up again this one, culp package solution. This one will then create the SPPKG file for us, which is the one which we can actually install to the app catalog. So now if I open up an Explorer, we can actually see that underneath SharePoint folder, underneath solution folder, we have this field extension SPPKG file created for us. You can absolutely see this file also in the solution structure. So if I go back on the Visual Studio Code, let's close all of that and extend actually the solution folder. We can see the SPPKG file being present in here. What the SPPKG file contains is actually in here in the debug folder. So you can see exactly what's included in SPPKG file by extending the debug folder. You do not need to go here, but if you're interested on actually what's inside of the SPPKG file, you can see that directly from here. You can, for example, make sure that your element XML file is getting properly rendered or included in the solution and referenced. You can also double check, for example, that your the manifest URLs and manifest loading URLs and the JavaScript loading URLs are being properly reflected as well. So right now we're still loading our stuff from a local host because we're not going to do a CDN deployment, but we can mimic the situation where we do not use the query parameter to activate the field customizer within a site. So we had the solution in the File Explorer. Let's open up our application catalog from our tenant. So there we go. There's my application catalog. Let's reload that one. We can see that this is the same tenant where we created already the application extension in the previous tutorials. If you've been following up on those, let's drag and drop the field extension to the site. And we get that confirmation from SharePoint that the administrator has to approve this application to be present on a site. So this JavaScript will be rendered in quotes in a full trust mode using the identity of the user. And that's why you need to actually explicitly trust this. We can confirm the URLs and the references and click deploy. And this means that the solution is now available to be installed on a site level. And let's actually do that. So let's go to our site and site contents, because we want to get that one installed properly and within a site. Now, this debugging allow script is slightly unexpected because we do not have a query parameter right now in the URL. And this is good to get actually recorded as well. And this is due to the fact that when you do the query parameter testing, every now and then the references are getting cached to your cookies and local store to make sure that you would be able to more easily do debugging. If you want to get rid of that caching, you can do here reset equals true as a query parameter. And that's going to actually then reset all of the cookies related on development, so we don't actually see that debugging string confirmation on this page. So I'm going to execute that one. All good. We're not seeing the extension anymore. If I go again to the site contents, we do not have a reference to the query parameters with all the debugging scripts, because we want to install the solution manually from the app catalog. So now if I go to a new app from app catalog, we can see our field extension to be available. So let's click that one. That is now getting installed on a site. And like mentioned, it might take a while to actually get it done. There's few things what you can actually do here while we're waiting. You can always fall back on the classic SharePoint side. So this one will give you a slightly more visibility on is it already there or not. And in this case, we can actually say that the field extension got actually activated on a site already. So I'm going to exit the classic experience, and we can now see that the field extension application is properly activated in here as well. So now we have our solution on the site. Let's actually create a new list because we want to test this field customizer in the list. And we're going to call this invoices and associate then the field inside of this list, which was deployed using that solution package. So as part of the solution package activation, that SB, the percentage field with the association to the field customizer was installed to the site as well. So now if I go back on the site contents, if I go on the invoices list settings, I can actually see underneath, I want to add that field to this list. So I'm going to click add from existing site columns, because now the site column was deployed using the element XML file when the solution was actually installed on the site. So add from existing site columns. And in here, if we scroll down in the drop menu, we can actually find SPFX columns. This is the group which was defined for the custom field. And there's our percentage field. We're going to add that one to the SharePoint list, and we're going to add it to the default view as well. And there we go, clicking OK. In this case, you want to double check that your console is up and running. So in my case, actually the console is up and running here, how you would do that is quite simply, you would execute the culp serve no browser, because we haven't actually updated the URLs, and we're not hosting the customization in a CDN in this case. In production usage, you would absolutely update the URLs accordingly and put the JavaScript being hosted from somewhere else than in your local host server. So let's actually execute and make sure that that's running properly. Good. So let's actually now flip back on the site. The local host is running. We're serving our JavaScript files from our server. Let's go to the site. Let's go to the invoices list. And then we can actually, we don't see yet the percentage field getting rendered here, but if we add an item here, let's call this item A again, and give it a value of 40 and click save, we can actually see our field customizer being rendered on a list without any query parameters. So let's do an item B with a value of 20 or 29, doesn't really matter. In this case, we can see that the UI is reflecting based on the value of the thing. And obviously, we are not using any more query parameters. We can see live the changes within a site, and we're still hosting the files and JavaScript files from the local host, like mentioned, but it's already getting served in a similar manner as we would be using this in the production usage. And that's all what we're going to do within this tutorial. So if you're interested on making the final step of putting this JavaScript hosted on CDN, have a look on our guidance tutorials on Azure CDN usage for SharePoint Framework, or Office 365 CDN usage for for SharePoint Framework. Relatively simple things to actually manipulate the URLs and then deploying the JavaScript files to the right location. But thanks for watching, and hopefully you'll follow up on the next tutorials as well. Thank you.